All righty. Well, good morning. Appreciate everybody joining us today. My name is Bergeron, Vice President at In-Telecom. Super excited to chat today and appreciate everybody tuning in. Really excited just to kind of get into it, right? And talk about business communications today in 2026, what we're seeing in the industry with our existing clients or prospects or even for ourselves, and how the communications world is really changing and evolving quickly in terms of what people are asking for, what we need, and it becoming a bigger part of our day-to-day operations. So today I'm joined with Miss Tiffany, Client Success Manager at In-Telecom. Tiffany, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Ben. Yes, my name is Tiffany Gerard. I'm a Client Success Manager here at In-Telecom. I'm really excited to jump in and talk about how communications and scalability is changing and growing in 2026 for all of our clients, current and future.
Cool. Well, appreciate it, Tiffany. So without further ado, we'll jump right in, right? So why is communication readiness super imperative in 2026? And I kind of want to start with AI, right? It kind of becomes this common theme that we're talking about in every different aspect of organizations today, right? And I think communication systems are no different, right? So how is AI reshaping how we use our communication systems as a business today? So I'd be really curious, Tiffany, what are some of the things that you're seeing today?
A lot of things that I'm seeing and hearing, obviously AI is a hot button subject right now, right? Everyone's talking about AI. I'm getting a lot of questions about how can AI benefit my business? How would this look in our environment? Essentially, it's like pressing the fast forward button on all aspects of reaction times, resolution times, solutions for some of our biggest clients. I'm hearing that, people, especially in an IT space, are looking for faster responses, immediate responses. If you think about, how is shipping changed in the last, like 5 years? If things aren't on your doorstep in 24 hours, 48 hours, people have a problem with that. We're also seeing that transform, or those expectations come across to response times and resolution times. So a lot of questions about how AI can help, how AI can support your staff and your business to really reach that level and reach those response times is something that I'm hearing on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I think that like maybe 6 months ago when I talked with people, we were talking about AI and it was a business conversation with different business owners, right? And we weren't really starting the conversation around communications platforms, right?
Right.
We were talking about automation here or there within the CRM or their PSAs and all their ERPs, right? Their service desk, right? But it's actually kind of cool when you think about it. The first place you really can start is your communications platform, right? Because when you think about how external people interact with your organization, especially if you're running a help desk or any form of a call center, there's so much data that's coming in through your communications platform, right? So you talked about the need for immediate responses or context awareness is really a thing that I'm hearing as well. So what I'm seeing is that AI-powered assistants, different types of chatbots, automated workflows that are part of our CRM, right? They're becoming standardized for what our clients expect. And I think that we're quickly connecting the dots that this is an integral part of our day-to-day operations, right? We're looking for this seamless transition between digital and human touch points, right? And there's so much data there. But how do we capture that data and make it more tangible or useful and help create some of this automation? Do you think you're kind of seeing some of the same things?
Yes, absolutely seeing the same things. Expectations are rising, and people are really looking for a way to integrate AI that feels human, right? There's a lot of conversations around how AI would feel for clients or customers, either calling in or reaching out. And a lot of my clients are saying we want this to be a seamless process for our clients, and something that doesn't feel robotic, right? We want it to be human, but better.
Yeah, it's and that hits home for me too. And I think for us as an organization is, yeah, we want to be really tech forward, right, and forward thinking internally, right, because we also need to do that for our clients and be at the forefront of different forms of AI integrations or automations. But there's also an element where we're really proud and of that human experience that we provide, right? And we don't want to lose sight of that, but we really want to leverage AI in a way that empowers our human workforce to make faster decisions, right? Have better data at their fingertips, make their job a little bit easier, and a little more scalable as well. But like the one thing that's super important is that we don't want to lose that client experience. So like, how do we kind of get into that, right? And I think the bottom line is like our communications platforms can power our client experience, and it can be a differentiator for us. But is that kind of what you're thinking or seeing?
Yes, 100%. And I think really where we hone in here with AI is, yes, everyone is not like fearful, but they're aware of AI's capabilities, right? No one wants, a world where jobs are lost because of AI. And I think what people really need to realize and understand is that AI as a support tool can also be a massive benefit for your staff members. Like, say for me, for example, if I have learned to integrate AI in my job on a daily basis, which makes me or produces more time for me to focus in on the client and other spaces that need my support, right? So I think it's important to have conversations with our clients around return on investment, revenue acceleration when integrating AI into your business. I think that's really a talking point. That's a subject line that we need to focus in on rather than what AI is going to replace. It's what AI will produce for your staff, for your business, the time that will open up and where you can generate revenue, expansion, scalability from that time created.
I think you make some really good points, right? There's this, like I even find myself how I used to think about communication system, maybe 3-4 years ago, that it just kind of felt like this race to the bottom, right? Where every decision businesses were making were based on purely on cost-driven decisions. But what I'm seeing, in more recent history, these last 12 to 18 months, is this pivot from communications platforms being a cost center to true revenue driver within the organization, right? And I think AI is bringing that to the forefront, right? It is changing how we can leverage our communications platform to drive revenue within the business. We can have better visibility into missed opportunities when people are calling in. And as a business owner, right, like we want to have that change, right? Like we want to drive growth in the organization. And I think our communications platform is a great place to start in helping do some of that. You think about some of the different integrations, like with your CRMs, but like let's go a step further, right? So like let's talk about marketing function. Let's talk about inbound, right? So where communications platforms now are like really omni-channel by default, right? We think about like picking up the phone and like that being our only communications platform, right? But there's so many other aspects to it. So like, yes, there's voice, but think about all the different chat features that we have today, right? Where they're integrating and the data's coming into your CRM, right? And it's really part of your communications platform, but like maybe we have chats going on. People are chatting with us. You have different SMS functions, right? We're texting. You have email. You have socials, right? Self-service portals. all these different things are part of your communications platform. And I think it's really imperative that you look at that because you want to centralize that in a way where it empowers your business.
Totally agree, Ben.
Yeah. So what does communication readiness mean, like when you start talking unified conversations, right, across all these channels, right? So I think traditional call centers were built for a different purpose, right? It was just like cost containment, ticket resolution, client experience, all those different things. What do you kind of think is changing today from those traditional call centers to a more modern call center and what those are built for?
Call centers today, or as I am seeing them today, have absolutely grown and expanded so many different ways. I see clients using their call center data in a multitude of ways, right? I think in the past, there wasn't a whole lot of visibility into, say, calls that were coming in, calls answered, the tone of those calls, calls that were lost, right? I think call centers today, our clients are using them to pull that data and to be able to say of, 1,000 calls today, 2,000 calls today, this is the percentage that were answered. And I can see in one pane of glass how the tone of all of those calls went, how long they lasted for, who was taking those calls, in order to decide, hey, this department may be outperforming or overperforming, and then maybe over here they have some slack to pick up.
I think it's kind of funny because I think about the things that were really important in a call center, right? Like we talk about SLAs, we talk about drop calls, we talk about talk time, we think about resolution, but now we are with different forms of AI, and like we're talking about all the different communication systems that go into our platform, right? Whether it was voice or SMS or chat or email, socials, all these different things in our communications platform in which our clients are interacting with us. There's different types of data that you're looking for today, right? And I think AI has enabled us to grab different things. I think about sentiment, right? Where one thing might used to be when we think about call quality, right? It was just about, could you understand the connection? Could you understand, right? But quality is almost like something different now, right? Like when you're looking at sentiment and you're able to understand tone, or between your team, right? Like when did your team not use the right tone when interacting with a client? When did a client use certain language or verbiage that maybe all of a sudden you're able to identify potential churn risk, right? From a revenue retention aspect. So like you have data that's informing your pipeline. You have these upsell opportunities that maybe the human didn't recognize in that moment, but because we've turned on AI in a different way and we're gathering some of that sentiment, we're able to take a step back and look at it. Instead of it being a missed opportunity, now it becomes something that, we can review, we can follow up and do something a little different and take action based on the data that we're grabbing.
Yes, definitely enables proactive engagement, right? To be able to pull that data and say, hey, we've had X number of calls with, a negative sentiment from this specific client. It enables us to be able to reach out proactively and say, hey, my name is Tiffany. I'm just calling about, recent XYZ. Tell us how we can do better. Tell us how we can help solve this problem. I think that really means a lot to our clients. And to businesses in general, right?
Yeah.
Think about if someone reaches out to you, even if it's like your boss or a family member that says, hey, I've noticed XYZ going on. How can I help? How can we do better? That's a really good feeling. And that is certainly something that AI enables for us in our communications every day.
You used to have to do all this research, right? Like you'd have to look and read every individual thing that had happened.
Right.
And now you're having data that's like readily available to you that just comes to you because you've trained your system in a way to flag certain things. So
Yes.
I think it's really empowering people. I think it empowers, people specifically in your role today and what you're tasked with, So, but we'll kind of move along here. I appreciate that. That was some good stuff. But like, let's keep moving forward a little bit, and let's talk about some other changes within the communications ecosystem, and like, what is really a requirement today? I think back, like, how could any of us ever forget COVID, right? So
Right.
it does feel like it was 10 years ago now, but so it really changed the workforce, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what was needed from your communication system, where everybody went remote overnight, right? So fast forward to today, is like, there's a ton of return to office that I think that's really becoming the norm, but the hybrid workforce still exists, and I think it's here to stay. It's permanent, right? But the good thing is that our communications platforms today are built in a way that allow for better business continuity, right? Distributed teams are really the norm, not the exception. And
Right.
I think this is something that needs to factor into our communications readiness plan. Is, are we in a place today to be able to support those things?
I totally agree with you, Ben. In 2020, that pivot to hybrid work was immediate, right? I think everyone felt the impacts of that and how jarring it was. Obviously, communications have changed. I definitely agree with you that hybrid work is here to stay. And a lot of our clients, a lot of businesses have embraced that. Our communications platforms absolutely enable all of our staff and all of our client staff to work however, whenever, wherever they want, which is such a great luxury, right? To be able to have to work from home or work from wherever you happen to be is essentially not, it's just not something that can be taken off the table,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think we have to have like secure, reliable collaboration from
Yes.
anywhere. It keeps the business moving forward instead of, I think at one point in time is like, if somebody couldn't be at the office, you had to replace the body and you had to get somebody there. Now you can accommodate certain things and there's less impact to the business, because people can still do what they need to, but from a different location. And it's also part of like disaster recovery plans, and when we talked about business continuity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, is what happens if something like that happens again, right? What if so a storm comes in and knocks out your facility, right? And your workforce is displaced, right? So it's important that you have this unified communication system between video, messaging, file sharing. So and I think today, like, what we have to have too is like, we have to have that performance visibility across remote environments. And I think having the right communication system in place allows us to still have those things, but it needs to go into our planning about what we need from our system. All these different things have to be something that we're thinking about really early on, right? Especially when we're thinking about adopting change. I think that organizations that treat their communication as part of their infrastructure, not just an app, right? They're going to be the
Right.
ones that maintain productivity and culture at scale, right? Especially in like volatile markets, So is that kind of what you were thinking?
Yes, 100%. I think when sitting down with clients and talking about their communications and talking about even some of their competitors, they're looking to align faster, share that information seamlessly, even in emergency situations, is really important. Um, and they also want to reduce friction between departments in situations like that. If something was to happen, either emergent or not, even if you have teams working remotely, or we're sending a team off to do, go to an event, or we have multiple branches in multiple states across the country, across the world even, those are things that our clients are looking for. And that's really what they need to be competitive in their market.
Yeah, I think that integration piece is, is really critical. You were talking about like reduced friction between
Yes.
departments, right? Like all that stuff, like and being able to align faster, and I think it was like sharing information
Yes.
right away, right? All those things are really important for scalability. But when we start talking about like integrations, and especially on that reducing friction between departments, it's like communication can't be fragmented. You can't have an email here, you can't have a message there, or these siloed systems. Like when you have those, execution really slows. You have to like then compile all those things, bring it back into one place, right? But like your communication system should be a single pane of glass, right? That gives you readiness, gives you clarity, gives you speed, gives you accountability. Because the real goal is like the real time data visibility that we need to run the business to make decisions faster, right? So
Faster, better, more accurately. Because if it doesn't, who feels it at the end? It trickles
yeah,
down to your client. It trickles down to your client base.
that's a good point, right? Like
Yeah.
you feel it internally,
Yeah.
but the real outcome is the negative client experience.
Yes.
So I think communication, has always been critical, but like it's really become, like we talked about it being brought back to the forefront of how we operate as an organization, and like that visibility and control within our communication system is just so pivotal, and it's really become this live intelligence layer of how we make decisions, how we run our business, how we know what we need to do. But like, so as you're thinking through these things as a decision maker or an organization, like you have all these different options, right? And like you got to start going through some of these things, start planning in a different way. And I kind of want to get into some other things that go into like how you plan, right? So like when we move through this a little bit, like what are those pillars, right, that like you have to have at the forefront of like in any communications platform decision, right? So what are some things you see up here that kind of pique your interest, Tiff?
Standardized platforms, absolutely. And I think what really has changed over time is communication visibility. At one time, it was answering the phones, having those messages taken and ticket generating. But now with increased data, we've increased our visibility in general and learned to leverage that to your business, our business's benefit. So a reliable, scalable network foundation is
Yeah,
essential there. Yeah.
I agree. Like I think uh, infrastructure can mean so many different things, right?
Right.
But I think it's time like we kind of pivot past some of the yes, there's hardware components of what we
Hmm.
do, right? But like infrastructure is a lot bigger than that today, right? So like, but like let's just start with like some of the hardware stuff. Like, right, you have to have redundant, no, you have to have reliable internet, right? And but like I think you also have to have redundancies and some carrier diversity in there, right? You have to have a high performance network, but like let's think cloud first, right? Resilient architectures that can support those business continuity plans that we talked about. I think some of the other things too is like we talked a lot about like when making these decisions, thinking about them through the lens of like platform integration. I think at one point being able to integrate with a CRM was a feature. I think
Not a requirement.
today it's a
Yes.
requirement.
Today's requirement, 100%. 100%. And I think that's true across a lot of platforms. A lot of platforms, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I think about today, like even in my role, right, and our team and the conversations that we're having, and the requirement or need for our communication systems, whether it's Microsoft Teams, whether it's ITC Cloud, right, whether it's our note takers that we're using in calls, and the automation that for us isn't a feature anymore. It's a requirement to integrate with Salesforce, right? Like it's empowering our team to take data very quickly, put it in a way that's executable. And like, so your ecosystem has to be API driven. Like you have to have that functionality. So like when making some of these unified communications decisions or looking at your stack, you have to look at it through the lens of those aspects that we're talking about, whether it's the CRM, whether it's your ERP, whether it's your PSA. Like you have to have this omni-channel synchronization between all these different communication stacks. So like kind of talking about the SMS stuff, the email, like all of your stuff has to integrate in order to make it useful.
Definitely needs to be able to work interchangeably, right, together in sync, to see a return on the investments there, right, and ease of use across your department for sure.
I'm even seeing a lot on the compliance side. You know, as our client base evolves, their client base is evolving, right? And there is certain compliances that they have to adhere to, right, for the clients that they serve. And I think at one point, like you weren't really worried about your communications platform, but because you're interacting with all this data in a different way, it's imperative that there is some security and governance initiatives or adherence that like you have to bring into the conversation about the system that you choose to use, right? Whether is it SOC 2 compliant, right? Is, you know, like all the different things there, right? You think about encrypted voice and messaging, okay, role-based permission, audit trails, compliance logging, threat detection. Like people are interacting with your system and you're interacting with the system and interacting with the data in a different way. And this needs to be a conversation where you're doing your due diligence when you're planning for the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is a really this is a big subject, right? Compliance is something that we talk about and bring into the conversation every day, especially from some of our biggest clients, especially around like encrypted voice messaging, how those like role-based permissions would look, who has access to what, and where their confidential information is going. Certainly AI-powered threat detection is a huge one. I've seen it save the day more times than not. And I think for, you know, the average Joe would absolutely be shocked what AI is picking up, what AI is preventing for businesses. It's certainly a really exciting thing, but something that we bring up a lot. A lot. It's really important.
And I think I'm excited to talk about this next one because I don't think this ever gets enough time and energy. One thing that like is really important to me, especially when we're having conversations with different stakeholders or decision makers within an organization, is that we focus on the end users and having the right conversations with the right stakeholders within the organization. Because I think sometimes, I think you and I were actually in a meeting, you know, a couple months ago, and we were talking with the executive team, the people that were going to make the decisions on what they use, right? And as we started to peel back some of the layers, like what they wanted from a system versus what some of the end users wanted in the system were very different, right? So I think this is where, you know, you have to take a step back as a company and like create some user journeys and treat your communications platform like the software that it actually is, right? And like you have to create these user journeys with the people that are going to be using it to create a product roadmap of like, here's what I actually need. Because what I'm seeing is people say like, okay, I want X, Y, and Z. This is the most important thing to me. But when you don't keep the end user in mind of how they're going to engage with the system, you then have a system that you thought functionally would work, but you have terrible user adoption and you don't actually get the data that you were looking for.
Yes, it is super, super important not only to say, hey, we think this is going to be the solution for you, but to drill in a little bit deeper and say, what is the outcome here, right? And continued training and conversation with those end users to say, what problem are you looking to solve, Ben? In-Telecom says that this software is going to be great for you. Let's talk about how this is going to enable you in your everyday so that we can tailor that to you and we do see increased user adoptions in the end.
Yeah, and I think a pivotal part of this is, having some intuitive like collaboration tools, but like even taking it a step further, right, is like you really need to create role-based training programs, right? Because thinking about a unified system, right, you have all these different work centers or job profiles that are going to be using it. Each one's use case is very
unique.
Yes. So like you have to have, like when I talked about like user journeys, is like, okay, here's how Tiffany, our client success manager, is going to use this, right? Versus a sales rep, versus a L1 help desk technician, versus a L2 help desk technician, versus our project team, right? Each role is going to use the system very differently. So when we talk about user enablement, right, like it's really centered around adoption. Like you can never get the data that you need if you don't have the user adoption necessary to collect and obtain that data, right? So having those role-based training programs and continuous education and validation is pretty critical. And I think that's something like we do a pretty good job of as a communications provider.
Yes, I was absolutely going to say the same thing. I think that's where In-Telecom sets themselves apart. That's why we have departments like mine committed to the client to sit down and have these conversations and say, hey, here's a tool and here's how I think that it could benefit each of your departments. And then spending that additional time to sit down with those users and show them specific features and specific roadmaps to benefit them inside of whatever software or AI assisted technology that we're suggesting.
Yeah. I mean, tell me, how many times have you, like met with a client and you're talking about things and they're like, hey, look, I was approached by XYZ organization and we're thinking about making a change. And when you start peeling back the layers, the system already does what they're looking to do, right? So like there's no reason to make change. But what was the real problem?
Yeah, exactly. It was the missing piece. It was, oh wait, let me show you how what you have can already do that. And some of these spaces are so vast. Some of these systems are so vast. They really are all inclusive. What makes a difference is really just, like I said, drilling down and showing role-based benefits. Like, oh, hey, this actually does do this. We do have this app, or we do have the ability to pull that specific data that you're looking for. And most of the time, just a click of a button or the turning on of a feature.
Yeah. And I think this is a good segue, right? Is like, as we kind of talk about our differentiator, like we don't really just deploy communication systems, right? We design, we implement, we govern the entire ecosystem to help drive growth, protect the business, and enhance client experience. But like, where do we really start in this, right? And I think it starts with a strategic assessment. And I know that sounds a little basic, right? But I just kind of like to hear from your point of view, like, what does that mean to you, Tiff?
Strategic assessment, what a grand idea, right? It sounds kind of lofty. It sounds like not super specific, but it is, okay? What I like to do, or what I have done in the past, essentially, is to sit down with a client and say, hey, tell me about your business. Tell me what makes you really uncomfortable about your business. Where do you see gaps, right?
Mhm.
And to sit down either with myself or with, engineers on staff as well, and say, hey, we can pick that up here. This is where we see a gap. This is where we see risk. Tell us how
Yes.
you feel about that risk. And then we can move on to talk about solutions if the client's ready to have that conversation. But I think the most important part, especially as an IT partner, is to have those
Yeah.
conversations and to make the client aware. The worst feeling is always having something happen, right? We
Mhm.
don't want to arrive at an emergency without the knowledge that it was possible,
Mhm.
right?
For sure.
So that's
For
what
sure.
we like to do every day, all the time, is to sit down and have those conversations and say, hey, we know XYZ hasn't happened yet, but here's where we see risk, or the client, will say, hey, here's where we want to do better, or we want to have better coverage. Um, and that's really where we like to set it off.
Yeah.
So current state of communications, networking audits, to say,
Yeah.
hey, this is where we
Yeah.
see gaps in your network.
It's
Yes.
kind of like that. You talk about the business conversations, right?
Yes.
And the outcomes that we need, not that, but there's still, and not the technology, right? But there still is some of these other infrastructure conversations that you can have as
Yes.
well. And I think you're
Yeah.
alluding to those. So like, please continue with some of
Hmm.
those, like, those like, well, yeah, you just continue what you were going with. Sorry, I kind of cut you
Okay,
off on
great.
that one.
You don't have to cut me
So,
off. But right, it is having conversations around networking audits, risk for your business, redundancy, performance gaps. Where are you seeing performance gaps, and can we run some analysis on that? All of
mhm.
these things can fall underneath the umbrella of what we like to call strategic assessment. Um, what are your contact centers looking like? What are your CRMs
Mhm.
looking like? How do they have room for expansion? Do they have room for your, future growth if that's the goal for your business? Um, so really, there's
Yeah,
so
there's like
many
this
things that can
maturity
fall underneath
evaluation.
this. Yes, absolutely,
Yep.
absolutely. We always want to align with that growth and have ongoing conversations. Um, with lots of types of growth, right? Expansion, revenue growth. What are your operational goals? All of those things can fall underneath that umbrella of, strategic assessments, or where we're going, and how we can continue to have those conversations through the life of your business.
Yeah, I think it like look, the real outcome that you're looking for is just like a highly focused, prioritized roadmap that's
Yes.
tied to business impact, not just infrastructure upgrades, right? But to your point, okay, like from security and compliance posture, right? Performance gap analysis, that maturity evaluation, whether it's your call center, whether it's your CRM, whether it's the different tools that we're engaging, right? So like all those things are going to play a role and have a business impact that are going to help align to revenue growth and operational goals. And so I think that's a great place to start. And I actually love those conversations because I think that's when you get the wheels spinning a little bit. And I think that's when
Absolutely.
you're creating that foundation of having a mindset shift from looking at your communication system as a cost center
Hmm.
to a true like organizational growth driver, right? And so I
Yes.
think this is really pivotal place where you start, right? And then once you've had those types of conversations, the next step is to start talking about architecture and design, right?
Hmm.
um, and like I think at the forefront of that is like you want to engineer your your solution for resilience, for performance, and to support those growth initiatives. Would you agree?
Absolutely would agree. This is really when we get into the nitty-gritty of here's our here's our ideas, here's our concerns, here is our roadmap for scalability, right?
Yeah.
And how do we get there? Our next step is how do we get there? What
Yeah.
what can we add? What can we provide or lay out for the future to make those next steps possible.
Yeah, like the architecture, has to support a future
That
ready
growth,
design,
yes.
So I think about like the importance of the architecture and the design supporting not only what you're trying to achieve today, but how do we create and design a system that supports where we hope to be 5 years from now without having to make drastic change to the infrastructure associated with the platform, right? So we know that there's going to be advancements in AI. There's going to be advancements in the different communication channels that we talked about. So like you have to design your system to support that eventual growth of AI and those different the communication channels, right? If not, you're going to have all this sunk costs associated with like creating a platform that you're just going to have to change 2 years from now.
Exactly, which is why I think it's important to keep in mind that these conversations are ongoing, right? It's not just one conversation that we can have. Everything is growing and changing all the time. All of these platforms, governances, CRMs especially are always expanding, growing, changing. So our conversations are going to expand and grow and change just like your business would. And again, I think it's another way that In-Telecom sets ourselves apart. It's not a one-time conversation or a one-time, sit down to talk and roadmap. We're going to be doing it for the life of the relationship with your business.
Yeah. And I think like, look, I love all those types of conversations and like, okay, so you've done that, you've had that assessment, we've gone through some architecture and design, we've landed on what we want to do, right? So the next critical component into it is like, okay, how do we implement? And you started to allude to it, right? Like the continuous conversations that we have to have. But let's talk about implementation for a second, right? So I think it's important that like we deploy with discipline and then look for ways to optimize for performance, but like starting small, right? And ensuring
with
that
intent.
everything has to be done with intent, right? So because the real objective here is to, again, like kind of going back to some of that user adoption that we like enablement that we talked about, right? Is we want to have high adoption, we want to have measurable performance gains, and you want to have minimal disruption, because that's another key component too, is like we don't want to have downtime, right? We want to have minimal impact to the end users, we want to have minimal impact to the clients that we serve, right? So you have to do this with a high degree of discipline when you're making any type of change.
Yes, it's something that we see all the time, especially just for instance, right now we're in the middle of tax season. So all of, our CPA firms are super, super busy right now. Does that mean support or expansions and implementation stop during this time? No, like these things need to keep happening, but the intent needs to be there, right? To plan these things and to say, this is the tool that we need live ASAP. However, it is the end of February. We're at the height of tax season. We need to plan very, very disciplined.
Yes.
To make sure that those businesses aren't impacted, that they can go right into the use of those tools without downtime, and then increased or planned out maybe after the springtime, we're going into summer, we can come back and say, hey, how is this tool working for you? Let's talk about, how to implement the rest of your integration here. It's certainly conversations that we have all the time.
Yeah, and I think that ties into like some of these this next point, which is just like the ongoing support, right? Like
yes,
you have to stay accountable long after going live, right? So like what does that look like?
Long after going live, it's really the whole the whole definition of my job, right?
Yeah.
Then we go live, and then it is my job to step in and maintain that relationship, to check in, and really be the main point of contact to make sure that those adoption rates are going well, that whatever software or platform that we've presented and provided to our client is serving them with the intent that was communicated prior to the project.
Yeah. Well, look, of course, there's 24/7 monitoring, right?
Yes.
And like you really want to have proactive remediation. But like I think when we talk about some of the things that like you do in your role, right? Like, okay, it's the refinement of performance reporting. It's the accessibility to that reporting, right? It's okay, what does this team need to see? What do those end users need to see to make decisions? What do their leaders need to see to understand how things are flowing? What are the SLAs, KPIs that they're leading with? What does an executive dashboard look like, right? Those things are very different. So this like constant involvement and of monitoring and establishing different stakeholder relationships to understand what they need from the system from a reporting aspect. It just requires like continuous optimization so we can continue to stay aligned to what the organization's objectives truly are.
Absolutely. And I think it changes from organization to organization. What reporting are you looking for? What do you need to see on a weekly basis? What do you need to see on a monthly basis? Especially around security monitoring, right? We're constantly monitoring in the background 24/7 regardless, but what does that end user want to see on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, or a quarterly basis in terms of reporting to the end user?
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, the true outcome that we're looking for, it kind of goes back to some of the points that we already made, which is that you need a communications platform that can and will evolve with the business, right? That stays secure, stays compliant, is revenue aligned, is client focused, right? All these different things. And I think the cool thing about where we are today in 2026 is like we can do that. At one point, I think you really couldn't. At one point, it really was, hey, I'm putting a phone on the desk, right?
Yes.
To make sure that when somebody calls, we have somebody to answer. And I think there's just this big pivot to where our phone systems aren't getting left behind. They're becoming a bigger piece of what we're trying to achieve as an organization today.
Yes, 100% agree with you there, Ben.
Yeah, look, I think this is a good transition, right? So as we kind of start to wrap this up a little bit today, right? So where do you go from there? Right? We talked about some of those 4 key things that we want to do, right? But let's just get honest about it, right? So the first thing we need to do is we need to assess the current state. And we need to do this with honesty, right? And it might require us to be a little vulnerable, right? But like, I think most organizations would underestimate the communication risk that exists within the company today and overestimate performance. Would you agree?
I would 100% agree. And it's not uncommon to sit down to have these conversations and in the most loving way to maybe suggest, hey, what would happen if your communications went down?
Yeah.
Because it does happen. It does happen, especially with older systems. What would that look like for your business? And I don't think that's something that everyone always plans for or imagines that can happen. So it is important to think about those things, to consider the impact. What if your communications were down for a week? What would that look like for your business? Where's the revenue lost if you lost, a week's worth of communications, or even worse, a week's worth of data? What if you had no access to any of your data for a week? What would that look like for your business? And it really starts at these conversations to assess risk, to be able to plan for the future, because we do know that they happen. We do know that they can happen. They happen every day. It's really not a question of if it will happen, but when.
Yeah.
So that's why we like to have those conversations.
Look, I think there's some critical questions that leaders should ask, right? And it's not an IT audit, right? It's really
Right.
a business capability conversation, right? And we talked about being a little vulnerable, right? So it's like, okay, the first thing you're gonna, and there's some basics here, but it's like, okay, do we have a single view of like our client interactions today? I always think that's a good place to start, right? Is our network built for real-time collaboration? Is it ready for AI integrations? Okay, then it's okay, where are we vulnerable, right? Redundancies, compliance, right? And you mentioned a good one, right? So like, which is, what is our revenue risk, right? So how much revenue is tied directly to communications uptime, right? Are we measuring communication performance like we measure financial performance? And I think that's a pretty cool one to think about, right? Because we're talking about how critical and important our communication system is to the organization today. Do we treat it the same way from an accountability perspective as we maybe do our P&L, right? And should we, right? Because it is that critical, and it is that important that we look at our communications platform and its performance through that lens.
I totally agree with you, Ben. I totally agree. And once those conversations have happened, even in a state of vulnerability, right? That's really the first step to creating that catch-all, to creating that security, which is why I love that we have those conversations and we kick off with those assessment conversations, both in onboarding and with our current clients.
Yeah. And look, I think the next part is like that alignment, and not to be redundant, we talked a lot about like communications to growth strategy, revenue expansion, market expansion, but it's pivotal that our systems support scalability and productivity and operational control. And like the one thing I would say is like a growth strategy without a communication strategy really creates operational frictions, right? So like if your company is planning to enter a new market, and planning to increase client experience expectations, deploy AI, right? So like I think you have to have a different type of conversation internally around your communication architecture, and look at it a little differently. Is that kind of some of the stuff you're seeing in your day-to-day?
100%. And even with businesses, even with clients that maybe aren't looking to grow exponentially, which is okay, right? Not everyone's goal may be to expand or to grow, but you still have to remain competitive in your market, even if you're just happy as is. And the reality is, in competitive markets, which we know really well, people are growing in this way. They are taking their communications to the next level. Expectations are higher, both for response times, the ability to pull specific data. That's always going to be there, which is why I think it's important to plan for these things, even if your goal at the end of the day is not to be the next global superstar. You have to remain competitive in your market, and this is certainly part of it.
Yeah, and I think this ties into the next little bullet here, right? Which is something we talk about a lot, which is reactive versus proactive. And I think sometimes that falls a little flat, right? But it's super important when executed properly, right? Like a reactive model, for instance, it was like, okay, you're fixing outages when they happen. You're adding tools as problems emerge. You're addressing security after the incident. You're upgrading the platform only when forced to do so. What are you seeing as more of like what a true proactive model looks like?
A true proactive model we would sit down and say, hey, here's what's possible. Here's what's possible for your business, and here is what would need to happen to fix that issue, right? say for communication specifically, what is it going to look like if your whole team can't come into the office? They're not going to have access to that desk phone. They're all at home for whatever reason. Or say if there's like a natural disaster and your entire business has to pick up and operate elsewhere, what is that going to look like? Are you going to be reaching out to your IT company and saying, hey, we need help, my business is not operating right now? Or will you already have that in place to know that you can work through, your web portal or through your app? And that's true across all different systems. That's true for your CRM. That's true, for your data, for your files. Can you access those things and still be HIPAA compliant and work remotely? So proactive conversations and proactive solutions enable your team to be able to do that.
Yeah, for sure.
Reactive can look a lot differently. It's already happened. We're already looking for this solution, and it almost all the time, more times than not, does mean downtime. And that's never, an easy conversation to have or something that's easily, rectified in real time when you're in crisis. So that's something that we always want to avoid and plan for.
Yeah, I think, like in a proactive model, you're like truly monitoring performance trends in real time, right? Yeah. You're building redundancies before failure happens, right?
Exactly.
You're aligning the platform with the decisions that you're going to make on 3 to 5 years from now, right?
Right.
And I think the shift is cultural more so than it is technical, right? Like you're governing communications like the business critical asset that it actually is, right? And I think this kind of ties up some things, right? Like where communication readiness becomes viewed a little differently, right? We talked about a revenue operations discussion, right? It's a cybersecurity discussion, and there's this pivot, right? Like where it's also a client experience discussion, and it's not just an IT ticket, right? It becomes a conversation where your communication system is a board level risk discussion as well. Would you agree?
Absolutely would agree. Absolutely would agree. It is imperative in 2026 to have all of these things, to be ready to have these conversations. And I really do think that's where In-Telecom sets himself apart.
Yeah.
I'm sure you would agree with me too, Ben.
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, I appreciate you joining me today, Tiffany. I really enjoyed our conversation. And I appreciate everyone who tuned in today and everyone who registered or caught the chat today. We're going to send you a follow-up email after this with a link for you to schedule that strategic assessment that we were talking about.
Absolutely.
So feel free to reach out to Tiffany or myself, or email phone numbers listed on the screen. And until next time, again, I really appreciate it, Tiffany.
Thanks, Ben. Really enjoyed it.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
You too. Bye.